Sometimes the first warning sign is the one everyone laughs off. You're watching a channel where we break down real stories from 4chan, told by people who had to live through the strange parts themselves. The case ahead has that slow kind of tension that keeps tightening in the background. Settle in, lower the lights, and hit the bell if you're staying with us. All right, let's begin. What still bothers me isn't that I missed it. For about 3 weeks, I was actually proud of him. This was fall semester, 2021. First semester back in real classrooms after everything. I teach sociology at a big public university in Austin, and my seminar that year was on coercive social structures, cults, high control groups, that sort of thing. Small class, capped at 18, meets Tuesdays and Thursdays in one of those seminar rooms on the 3rd floor of the old building off Guadalupe. You know the type. Fluorescent tubes that hum. A whiteboard nobody has cleaned properly since 2018. A window that looks out onto a live oak, and past that, a parking garage. Enrollment was full, and the class was mostly what you'd expect. A couple of grad students slumming for credit, some sharp undergrads, a few kids who thought the reading list looked cool on the syllabus and then panicked in week 2. And then there was Cole. He sat in the same seat every session, 2nd row, right side, back against the wall so he could see the door and the window at the same time. Neat kid. Not stylish, just neat. Short, dark hair, collared shirt every day. One of those cheap black backpacks with nothing on it. No pins, no stickers. He never spoke unless I called on him. And when I did, his answers were the kind that made the rest of the class go quiet for a second. His first paper came in the 2nd week. The prompt was open. Something like, identify one mechanism of behavioral control and analyze it using 2 theoretical frameworks from the reading. Most kids wrote about MLMs, or their evangelical uncle, or the military. Cole wrote about isolation as a preparatory phase. Specifically, the practical steps a controlling partner uses to sever a target's outside relationships before the target is aware anything is wrong. He cited Lifton. He cited Herman. He worked in a piece on domestic coercive control I'd assigned as optional. It was, honestly, a better piece of writing than half the 2nd-year graduate work I'd seen the previous year. I gave it a 98 and wrote in the margin, excellent, push toward publication. The 2nd paper was on the erosion of a victim's sense of time and routine. How you make someone lose track of what a normal week even looks like. Again, clean writing. Careful citations. He'd found a 1990s study out of a British forensic journal I'd never even heard of. The 3rd one was where it started to feel off, and I want to be honest about this. It wasn't a big feeling, it was small. He wrote about detection and counter-surveillance from the perspective of what he called the operator, meaning the person doing the controlling. He spent about 2 pages on the ways bystanders, co-workers, family, tend to notice something is wrong, and how, from the operator's side, you'd anticipate and neutralize those signals. He used the word neutralize. He put it in quotes the first time, and then dropped the quotes for the rest of the paper. I remember reading that at my kitchen table, on a Sunday morning, coffee in one hand, and thinking, well, that's a framing choice. That's what I thought. It's a framing choice. He asked to meet for office hours the following Wednesday. That was normal. Half the class came through office hours at least once, mostly to complain about grades or to fish for topic ideas. My office is on the 4th floor, end of the hall, one narrow window, a radiator that ticks. I keep the door open by policy. Cole came in on time. He sat down and didn't take off his backpack. He just slid one strap down and let the bag rest against his thigh. I remember the way he opened the conversation, because it wasn't small talk. It wasn't, hey, professor, thanks for meeting. It was, I wanted to ask about the boundary conditions. That was his phrase, boundary conditions. I asked him what he meant. He said he wanted to know, at what point, in the literature, does the intervention become detectable to an outside observer? He wanted to know which behaviors were, in his words, load-bearing. Which ones you could not skip. Which ones a competent person could vary without losing the effect. He asked whether the research made a distinction between short-run isolation, meaning weeks, and long-run, meaning months to years. He asked whether there was any solid work on how quickly a target reconstructs their outside network once separated from the operator, and how that reconstruction could be disrupted. He was asking these questions the way you'd ask a mechanic about a specific engine. I did what you do in that situation, which is teach. I steered him back toward the ethics side of the literature. I mentioned Herman's work with survivors. I said something about how, in this field, we frame the question as protection and recovery, not, and I think I actually said this, not as a manual. He nodded. He wrote nothing down. Then he asked me a very specific thing. He asked whether university counseling records, in the state of Texas, were accessible to family members if the student was over 18. Not a class question, not related to any paper he had turned in. I told him no, generally not without a signed release. I asked why he was asking. He said, "Just curious about the systems." That was the phrase, just curious about the systems. There was a long moment where he looked at me, and I looked at him, and the radiator ticked. And outside, some kid on the sidewalk was laughing on the phone. I decided to end the meeting, not because I was afraid, just because the meeting was over and I didn't want to keep going. I said, "I think we're good for today. Really strong work so far. Just keep the analytical distance in your writing." He stood up, said thank you, and walked out, backpack over one shoulder. I turned to my laptop to jot down a note about the consultation, and that's when I saw the paper. He'd left a single sheet on the corner of my desk, standard printer paper, folded once, the crease crisp. It wasn't near his side of the desk. It was near mine, almost tucked under the edge of my keyboard tray. I unfolded it. It was a printed page, black and white, cheap toner. Top half was a home address, a street name in a neighborhood I recognized instantly, up in Hyde Park, north of campus. Full house number. Below that were times, a list of times, on different weekdays. Nothing labeled, just T740/855/520. Like that. The bottom half was a photograph, printed low resolution, but clear enough. Woman, maybe 40, walking on a sidewalk with a canvas tote over her shoulder, ponytail, sunglasses pushed up on her head. It was Marisol, colleague of mine on the same floor. We'd co-taught a section the previous spring. She had a 2-year-old at home and a husband who traveled for work. Her office was 3 doors down from mine. I sat there with the paper in my hand and I did not move for a while. I don't know how long. Long enough that the hallway sounds outside my door changed from the between classes shuffle to the empty quiet of the middle of the hour. The first thing I did, before anything else, was call her. Not text, called. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I asked her where she was. She said she was in her office. Why? I said, "I'm coming down the hall. Don't leave," and I hung up. I walked down with the paper still in my hand. I closed her door behind me. I told her what had happened, start to finish, and I put the sheet on her desk. She looked at it for a long time. She did not cry. She did not say much. She took a picture of it with her phone, and then she said, "That's my son's daycare drop-off time," meaning the 7:40. We went to the department chair together. From there it moved fast, faster than I would have guessed. The chair walked us to the dean's office within the hour. The dean called university police. University police called Austin PD. By that evening, a detective was in my office with the sheet in an evidence sleeve, asking me to write down every question Cole had asked me during the consultation, in the order I could remember them. They pulled his file. There were other things in it. A prior complaint from a TA in the philosophy department dismissed the previous spring for lack of specificity. A pattern of course enrollments in exactly the seminars where Marisol was listed as a co-instructor or guest lecturer. A parking citation that placed his car on her block on a Saturday morning in August. He was suspended pending review inside of a week, expelled within the month, on the combined grounds of the file, the paper, and a violation of the student code that I still don't fully understand the details of. Police issued a protective order, the preemptive kind, before anything physical had happened. Marisol changed her route to campus, changed her daycare drop-off time. Her husband cut a work trip short and stayed home for a while. Cole appealed the expulsion. He wrote a long, careful letter, from what I heard secondhand, arguing that the paper on his professor's desk was academic research material for a follow-up project, and that the address was a publicly available data point. The appeal was denied. I taught the rest of the semester in that same seminar room. His seat stayed empty. Nobody asked about him. That part surprised me, actually. 18 people in the room, twice a week, and not one of them ever said his name out loud again. I still have the file the detective gave me back, months later, when the case was closed on their end. Photocopy of the sheet, the address blacked out now, the photo of Marisol still visible under the redaction. It sits in a drawer in my office. I just haven't thrown it out. The gate camera caught him at 11:52. I know because I checked the log twice. I was 3 hours into a 12-hour shift, halfway through a bag of pretzels from the vending machine, when the motion alert pinged on the monitor. Camera 4. That's the one aimed at the front gate off McKee Place, the side that faces the road. I'd triggered that camera plenty of times myself. Never once caught anyone else on it after 10. Nobody comes to a medical supply warehouse in the Strip District at midnight. There's nothing to see. Big gray box, chain link, razor wire, a Terex sign the previous tenant never took down. But there he was, an older guy, maybe 70, standing on the sidewalk on the other side of the fence, hands in the pockets of one of those tan members-only style jackets you don't really see anymore, wool cap. He wasn't leaning on the fence. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was just standing there, facing the building, like he was waiting for a bus at a stop that didn't exist. I watched him for about a minute, figured he'd move on, drunk maybe, or lost. It was March, and the temperature had dropped into the high 20s after sundown. You could see his breath on the feed. He didn't move on. I zoomed in. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, looking at the gate. There was a dark sedan parked half a block down, hazards off, but I couldn't tell if it was his. Quick context. I'm a security guy at a warehouse that stores DME, durable medical equipment, wheelchairs, hospital beds, oxygen concentrators, CPA, Ps, that kind of thing. We also hold a bonded pharmacy section in the back, temperature controlled, for a couple of specialty distributors who ship out during the day. Insulin, some injectables, nothing that would tempt a kid off the street, but enough that we have real locks, and I do a walkthrough every 90 minutes. Point is, I know the difference between somebody drunk walking home and somebody casing a place. This guy wasn't drunk walking, but he wasn't casing either. Casers don't stand still. They walk past, look at angles, leave. They don't post up like a lawn ornament and stare. I called the property manager, voicemail, which I expected. Then I called dispatch at our security service. The girl on the other end said standard procedure was to call non-emergency and let a cruiser drive by. She'd file it. I said, sure, do that. Hung up. Sat there another 5 minutes. He still hadn't moved. Here's the thing about doing nights, alone, in a building the size of a Costco. Your mind fills the empty space. Every rattle in the ductwork becomes a footstep. Every raccoon on the loading dock becomes a break-in. You learn to shave it back down to what's actually there. What's actually there is almost always nothing. But this was something. I put on my jacket. I put my radio on my belt. I walked out through the side door, across the yard, past the delivery bay, and up to the inside of the front gate. He saw me coming. He didn't step back. He didn't step forward. Just watched me the way you watch a waiter walking toward your table. Up close, he was smaller than the camera made him look. Thin, sunken cheeks, gray stubble, 3 or 4 days worth. His eyes were watery from the cold. His hands were shaking, but that could have been anything at that age and that weather. Sir, I said, you can't be here. This is private property. I know, he said. That threw me. Usually people apologize or get defensive. He didn't do either. I'm not trying to come in. I know you can't help me. I just didn't know where else to go. I asked what he meant. He said his wife was a diabetic, type 1. She was 58 and she'd been on insulin since she was 9. He said she'd been rationing the last vial for about a week, cutting doses, and around 8 that night, her blood sugar had spiked up over 400 and she'd started throwing up. He'd driven to the CVS on Center, closed. The Walgreens on Baum, closed. Some place in Bloomfield that supposedly had a 24-hour window, also closed, or the window was locked, he couldn't tell. He said he'd sat in his car outside that Walgreens and searched on his phone for Insulin Pittsburgh 24-hour, and this address had come up. Something about a distributor. He knew a distributor wasn't a pharmacy, but by then he was already parked out front, and he didn't have another idea, and he thought maybe if he stood here, somebody would come out and he could ask. I know you can't give me anything. I just needed to try one more thing before I go home. I didn't say anything for a second. I was trying to read him. There's a version of this story where the guy is running a scam, where there's a second guy in the sedan, where the whole point is to get me to open the gate. I'd been trained on that. We all had. But he didn't ask me to open the gate. He didn't ask me for anything. He'd already said no to himself. I asked what her name was. He said Marlene. I asked what she'd used, brand-wise. He said Humalog, mostly, and something long-acting he couldn't pronounce. I asked if she'd been to an ER before for this. He said yes, twice, and the bills had almost killed them a different way. So this time she told him not to take her. He said she was at home. He'd left her with a glass of water and a plastic bowl. He needed to get back. I told him to hold on. I went back inside. I did not open the gate. There's a laminated card taped under the desk in the booth. On-call numbers for every operation we serve, in case something goes wrong with a shipment or a cold chain alarm. Most I've never used. One was for a pharmacist who ran the after-hours line for a regional chain we supplied. I called him. His name was David. He was awake, which surprised me. I told him what I had at my gate. I told him I knew this wasn't his problem. I asked what he'd do. He was quiet for maybe 3 seconds. Then he asked for the man's location, the wife's name, her date of birth, and what she was on. He said he'd meet him at the store on Liberty in 20 minutes. He said he could dispense a vial under an emergency protocol, that Pennsylvania had one, and he'd figure out the paperwork in the morning. He said, "Tell him to drive careful, the roads are bad." I went back out to the gate. I told him the address. I made him write it down on the back of a receipt he had in his pocket, because I didn't trust that he'd remember. I asked if he had money. He said, "Not really." I told him not to worry about that part right now. That was mostly true. Then I asked him if he had insurance. He said no. Marlene had lost her coverage when she'd gotten laid off from the school district in 2021, and they'd been trying to piece it together since. I told him to hang on one more minute. Back inside, I pulled up a bookmark I'd saved months back and never used. A patient assistance program one of the manufacturers ran for people without coverage. I'd seen a flyer in one of the crates, and something told me to save the link. I wrote down 2 phone numbers and the name of the program on a piece of copy paper. I walked it back out and pushed it through the gap in the gate. I told him to call in the morning. I told him this wouldn't fix everything, but it might get the next 3 months of vials down under what a tank of gas cost. He looked at the paper for a long time. He didn't say thank you the way people say thank you when they're trying to get off the phone. He said it like it was the only word he had left. He turned around and walked to the sedan. It was his. He got in. He sat there with his head against the steering wheel. Then he pulled away, slow and careful, exactly the way you'd want somebody to drive if their wife was waiting at home. I stood at the gate until I couldn't see the taillights anymore. Then I went back inside. I finished my walkthrough. Pharmacy section. Locked. Alarm armed. Temp reading nominal at 36. Bay doors. Secure. Roof access. Secure. Vending machine still out of Cheez-Its. I sat down at the desk and opened the logbook. Every 90 minutes we're supposed to write a line. Time. Initials. Status. I looked at the clock. 1:14 a.m. I wrote, routine patrol, no violations. I closed the book. I put the pen back in the cup. I sat there in the quiet of the booth with the monitors humming and the space heater ticking and the wind moving the razor wire above the fence. Around 3, the alert pinged again. Camera 4. I looked up, my chest tight for a second before I could think. It was a fox, trotting along the sidewalk in the same spot, tail low, breath fogging in the sodium light. I watched it until it was out of frame. Then I made another coffee. The job listing said, English-speaking customer support in Guangzhou, $3,000 a month plus housing, no experience needed. I applied on a Tuesday. 10 days later, I was on a plane to China, and by the following Monday, my passport was in a drawer I would never open. They picked me up at Baiyun Airport in a black van. Guy who introduced himself as Alan spoke perfect English, joked about jet lag, bought me a bottle of water. Said the office was in the Panyu district, that I'd have my own room, that a lot of Americans worked there. I remember thinking he seemed friendly. That was probably the last honest thought I had for a while. The building looked normal from the outside. 6 floors, tinted windows, tiled lobby. On the 4th floor, there was a door with a keypad. Alan punched in the code, held it open, and once I walked through, I heard it lock behind me, and I felt something drop in my gut. Inside, there were maybe 40 desks, cubicles, headsets, dual monitors. Half the seats were filled with guys my age or a little younger. A few Filipino, some Malaysian, 3 or 4 other Americans. No one looked up when I came in. Alan walked me to a small office in the back where a man he called Mr. Wu was sitting behind a desk with 2 phones and an ashtray. Wu asked for my passport to register with local authorities. I gave it to him. He put it in the top drawer and locked it with a small key that went into his shirt pocket. Then he explained what I was actually there to do. The script was on the 2nd monitor. You call an American number, usually someone over 65. You tell them you're from the Social Security Administration or the IRS, or sometimes their bank's fraud department, depending on which script Wu assigned you that morning. You tell them there's a problem with their account. You tell them a warrant will be issued if they don't cooperate. You walk them through buying gift cards at their local CVS and reading you the numbers on the back. That was the main version. There were 4 or 5 others. I told Wu I wasn't going to do that. I said I wanted my passport back. I said I'd figure out my own flight home. He didn't get angry. He just slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of my visa, my flight info, and a photo of my mom's house in Ohio taken from across the street. He said the men who ran things owned him too once, and now he owned me. And if I made trouble, my family would find out what trouble costs. He said it very calmly, in the tone of a guy telling you the printer's out of toner. I sat down at desk 17 that afternoon and made my first call. The woman who answered was named Dolores. She was 71 in Boca Raton. I read the script about her social security number being flagged for suspicious activity. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hold the mouse with 2 fingers. She got scared. She started crying halfway through. I walked her to a Walgreens and had her buy $900 in Google Play cards. When I hung up, one of the floor bosses clapped me on the shoulder and said, "See, not so hard." I went to the bathroom and threw up in the sink. That was April 4th, 2022. The dorms were on the 5th floor, bunk beds, 6 to a room, 1 window that didn't open. I bunked under a guy named Marco from San Diego. He'd been there 8 months. He told me the rules on the first night, quietly, so the cameras in the hallway couldn't pick it up. Don't talk about home. Don't ask about anyone who leaves. Don't try the fire exits. They're wired to an alarm at the security desk. If Wu asks how you're doing, say, fine. If a floor boss offers you a cigarette, take it, even if you don't smoke. I asked him why. He said, because saying no is the first thing they notice. There were maybe 15 of us on that floor. A kid from Chicago they called Rabbit because of his teeth. A guy from Houston named Devin who prayed under his breath between calls. A quiet Filipino man everyone just called Tito. And there was Ellis. Ellis was the one who ran. He'd been an EMT back in Sacramento before he got here on the same kind of listing I did. Second week of my time there, he told me at dinner he had a plan. He said the delivery guys came through a service entrance on the ground floor, and the door didn't fully close for about 3 seconds when they walked out with their carts. He'd been timing it for a month. He said if he could get to a taxi, he could get to the consulate. I told him it sounded risky. I didn't tell him not to try. He went on a Thursday. I know because we'd had noodles for lunch, the good kind with the pork, and he barely ate. They brought him back Saturday morning. Two men I'd never seen before walked him through the main floor, one on each arm. His face was swollen on the left side. He was holding his right hand against his chest like it was made of glass. Wu made everyone stop typing. He stood at the front of the room and said, in English, Ellis wanted a vacation. Ellis went to see the city. Then he lifted Ellis's right hand and showed us. 3 fingers, bent the wrong way at the middle knuckle. Not broken clean. Broken like someone had taken time with them. Nobody said anything. Wu nodded once and told us to get back to work. Ellis sat down at his desk. He was crying without making noise. Later that night in the dorms, Marco whispered to me, "That's the warning version. The next one you don't come back from." After that, I stopped thinking about running. I made calls. Every day, 12 hours, sometimes 14 if we were behind on quota. I got good at it, which is the part I still can't say out loud. I learned which voices meant loneliness and which meant somebody's kid was in the room listening in. I stole $7,000 from a widower in Phoenix in a single afternoon. I don't remember his name on purpose. The idea came in June. Wu had a rule that we weren't allowed to say anything that wasn't on the script. Every call was recorded. A quality control guy named Peng sampled maybe 1 in 50 and reviewed them for deviation. If you deviated, you lost meal privileges for a day. If you deviated twice, worse. But the recordings only got flagged for review if the call ended with money. If the target hung up early or refused, the recording got dumped after 24 hours without anyone listening. I sat with that for 2 weeks before I did anything. The woman's name was Nadine. She sounded about 75, Texas accent, said she was in a town called Marble Falls. I got about 4 minutes into the script, and I could tell she wasn't going to bite. She kept asking why the Social Security office was calling her from a number that didn't match the one on her card. She was sharp. She was going to hang up. Right before she did, I dropped my voice and I said, quickly, "Ma'am, listen, I'm calling from Panyu District in Guangzhou, China. I am not here voluntarily. Please tell the U.S. consulate, Panyu, Guangzhou, please." She was quiet for maybe 2 seconds. Then she said, "Okay, honey," and she hung up. I sat at desk 17, and I could feel my pulse in my teeth. Peng was 3 rows over, headphones on, going through recordings from the morning. I had 6 more calls to make before lunch. I made them. Nothing happened that day, or the next, or the week after that. I started to think she'd forgotten, or written it off as a prank, or that maybe I hadn't spoken clearly enough and she'd just heard a scammer say something weird. 2 months went by. It was August. Hot in a way that made the 4th floor windows sweat on the inside. Then one morning, Wu wasn't at his desk. There were 2 men in the hallway I'd never seen, in short sleeves and khakis, and one of them was speaking English into a phone. Marco pretended to stretch and looked over his monitor and whispered, "Consulate," just the one word. They pulled 6 of us out that afternoon. Me, Marco, Devin, 2 guys from the 6th floor I barely knew, and Rabbit. They didn't tell us where we were going until we were in the van. A woman in a navy blazer met us at what I later learned was a hotel near the consulate. She asked me my full name. I hadn't said it out loud in 4 months. It came out wrong the first time. She told me a woman named Nadine in Texas had called her local sheriff, who called the FBI, who called state. She said Nadine had written down every word I'd said, and then written it down again in case she lost the first paper. I got home on August 19th. Tito wasn't in the group they pulled out, neither was Ellis. Marco told me later, through a signal number I'm not going to write down here, that a week before the raid, Wu had moved 8 people to what he called the other site. Nobody's heard from any of them. Not the families, not the consulate, not anyone. I still have Nadine's number. I called her once, from a payphone in a Kroger because I didn't trust my own phone yet. I thanked her. She said, "Baby, you told me where you were. That's all I needed." That was the last time I said any of it out loud. And that's it for today, everyone. Write in the comments which story got under your skin the most, and support the video if it kept you watching. 4chan is full of noise, but every now and then, something comes through that sounds a little too personal. Not everything strange announces itself loudly. I'll see you in the next video.